Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern bar cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome back to another episode of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Eric Kozlik, and this episode we've got a really exciting interview for you that takes what we'll call a multidisciplinary approach to cocktails. What do I mean by that? Well, in this episode, we hang out with architect, illustrator, and cocktail buff Melissa Wood, who is partially responsible for one of the coolest cocktail books I've ever come across. The book is called The Architecture of the Cocktail, and it portrays mixed drinks and their ingredients as if an architect drafted them on a blueprint. Crazy, I know, but I think Melissa's approach to visualizing cocktails and their ingredients can teach us some really interesting things about mixology. But, as always, before we jump in here, I want to give you the chance to make yourself a drink. And I figured we should probably feature something seasonally appropriate that is also portrayed in Melissa's book. So, as I was flipping through, I came across a cocktail with a dangerous sounding name, the El Diablo. To make this drink, you're going to need a couple normal cocktail staples, tequila and ginger beer, and also a slightly less common ingredient called creme de cassis. Now, we've encountered this ingredient on the podcast before. It's a French-style liqueur made with black currants, which are difficult to find in the US due to a law against their cultivation designed to prevent a certain type of blight. However, there are a few places where the laws have been revised. New York is one of those places, and we're starting to see some domestic versions of creme de cassis. One of those is produced by our friends over at Mount Defiance Distillery in Middleburg, Virginia. And if you want to learn more about that, you can hear distiller Peter Alf talk about the process of procuring those black currants and some of the laws surrounding that cultivation back in episode 19 of this podcast called Misfit Spirits. And if you want another take on creme de cassis, check out flavor scientist Dan McCall's explanation of why black currants are so damn delicious way back in episode 5. So, we're back on the El Diablo now. We've got our tequila, our ginger beer, our black currant liqueur, and a lime for our garnish. And I'm going to give you two different approaches to the recipe, and you'll see why in a second here. So, according to the architecture of the cocktail, you'll combine 2 ounces of Blanco or silver tequila, same thing, 3/4 of an ounce of creme de cassis. You're going to take those, put them in a Collins glass with ice, and then top that up with ginger beer and garnish with a lime wedge. Since you're putting in the creme de cassis before the ginger beer, it's also useful to give that a quick stir with a straw before you put on your garnish because logically the liqueur is going to be heavier. It's going to kind of sit at the bottom. So if you want the drink to be balanced, you're going to want to give it a little stir. Then we got a slightly different take on the El Diablo from imbibe.com. And this recipe calls for 1.5 ounces of reposado tequila. So it's slightly aged. You've got a 1/2 ounce of creme de cassis, a 1/2 ounce of lime juice, and then 3 ounces of ginger beer. So if you compare these two, the architecture of the cocktail version of the El Diablo is going to be a bit sweeter, a bit more mellow, with the emphasis on the creme de cassis and the ginger beer, whereas the imbibe.com version is going to be driven by the flavor of the aged tequila, and it's going to be accented by that healthy dose of lime juice. So from this, we can gather that when you want to make an El Diablo cocktail, you know that you need tequila, creme de cassis, and ginger beer, but the questions you should be asking yourself are A, what kind of tequila do I want to use? B, how much acidity do I want in my drink? Do I want an actual dose of lime juice, or do I just want to have that lime wheel as the garnish? And then C, how sweet do I want it to be? Creme de cassis is a notoriously sweet liqueur, very fruity and also very sweet, so just dialing that up 1/4 of an ounce is really going to affect the outcome of the drink. So, answer those 3 questions. The ingredient ratios you'll want to use should be very clear. And now that your head is spinning with all that wonderful El Diablo information, let's return to our interview with Melissa Wood. Some of the things that she and I discuss include how a girl with a love for literature and art forged a career for herself in the world of architecture and design, the similarities and differences between cocktails, buildings, and designed spaces, the process for figuratively slicing open 70 cocktails and organizing their guts for us on a piece of paper, best practices for setting the mood during your next cocktail party, the reason why blueprints are blue, and much, much more. The Architecture of the Cocktail is a book you should have on your shelf for a couple reasons. One, it's the first book of its kind to present recipes in such a visually engaging way. So if you've ever uttered the words, "I'm a visual learner," you're in for a real treat. And two, it's just a beautiful object to have on your bookshelf. I actually place mine with the cover facing outwards so that I can see it every time I walk by. So be sure to hit up the show notes to check out more of Melissa's work, and please head over to your local bookstore to pick up your own copy of the book. But for now, all you've got to do is sit back and enjoy this design-driven cocktail conversation with architect and illustrator Melissa Wood. Melissa, thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure. I'm happy to be here.
So we're here to speak about a really interesting topic in cocktails. It's a little bit different than anything we've ever talked about, so I'm excited for that. But before I spoil it, can you just introduce yourself and tell folks a little bit about what you do outside of the world of cocktails, and then we'll get there.
I am happy to do that. I draw. I draw for a living. I'm an illustrator, sort of by default. I had other career aspirations. I graduated from college with a degree in English literature, art and history. I thought I was going to go tackle Hollywood and write fascinating scripts and direct fascinating movies, but instead I didn't. I ran a printing press outside of the Chicago suburbs because I couldn't get a job. So I decided that I should go to graduate school so I could have a training and so I could get my life going. So first I went to the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, and that turned out to be really mellow. It would have been great for an undergrad degree, but for graduate school, I was on the pressure cooker of my life because I really wanted a darling apartment in a city and a top career. So I ended up switching schools to a full-time interior design, interior architecture program in Chicago on Michigan Avenue, overlooking Grant Park, Lake Michigan. It's beautiful. And I learned how to build buildings, design buildings, do architectural sections, became a colorist. I studied textiles, everything you need to know to build a building, design the interiors, deal with clients, illustrate. It was mastered there. I also got a lot of background in art history, which I tipped on a little bit in college, or touched on, but I hadn't really delved into it. So then I got a job in architecture in Chicago, and I did a lot of contract design, some restaurants, some residential, interiors, exteriors, worked with some cool people. And then I had a baby, moved out of the city, didn't have a job, but I realized I needed an outlet for my little creative energy, and I also wanted to earn a little pin money. So I've always been able to draw. I designed my son's birth announcement, and all the neighbors were running around asking me to design something for them. So from that, I launched a stationery company, worked out of my house. I did that for 18 years, raised the kids as a single mom, draw. Architecture, people would hire me to draw their houses, either portraits or greeting cards, because I had learned how to get things printed. It's post-fax machine, but it's pre-Google. It's pre-website. It's pre-everything. We're talking the Stone Age. And I was running around with 3 babies and a company at home. But I got a lot of clients, and I got a lot of wonderful connections from people that bought note cards. Celebrities came to call. I did a lot of custom work for them. So I ended up just drawing for a living. When I got tired of the note card business after 18 years, I decided I wanted to design other products without the overhead of packing and shipping and having sort of a warehouse existence. So I just started figuring out the whole social media thing. I had successfully gotten press for my card company by sending notes to editors of major magazines, because back in the 90s and the 00s, that was how you got press. Little article in Town and Country, and Oprah Winfrey's producers saw that. So then I was one of Oprah's favorite things, and it spun into, sort of a more of a national presence, but I didn't want to do the note card thing. I started pitching myself on my website, because now websites were a thing, and I figured out my gig would be just to draw pretty pictures, stick it up on the website, and connect it to LinkedIn. I mean, that's the amount of thought I put into it. And that brought me Garnet Hill, collaboration with a great art rep, and we did a lot of work with Crate & Barrel, 3 series of framed illustrations, bedding on Garnet Hill, holiday, Santa Claus, really adorable children's bedding. But the best of all, which led to this book, is an editor of HarperCollins UK saw one of my posts from my website that went to LinkedIn and loved my illustrations. So she sent me an email and said, "Are you interested in illustrating books?" And I literally answered, "What took you so long?" Because I've always wanted to illustrate books, and I love reading, I love drawing, and the two made sense to combine. So we were going to do a travel book together. But before that, I said, "Would you be interested in a cocktail concept?" And what I had launched this blueprint idea from had to do with a framed print that we had done with Crate & Barrel. My art rep had thought of the idea, said, "Can you do your architectural work on cocktails?" And there was a great cocktail blueprint that Crate & Barrel sold for a couple of years, and it had been discontinued. So I showed it to my new editor, and she said, "That's the book. We'll hold off on the travel books." And so that brings me to you. That's how we got the book going. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. I remember the first time I saw the book, I was at Tales of the Cocktail, and it jumped off the shelf next to some of the others. It's got a picture, I believe, of, is the martini or the Manhattan on the front?
It's a martini. No, it's a Manhattan, because that, my friend, is a cherry.
There it is. So we've got a beautiful picture on the front, and immediately it kind of distinguished itself from most of the other books that have these very Instagrammy looking, very beautiful, but very Instagrammy looking kind of cocktails on the front. And so I said, "What is this?" And I opened it up, and I ended up flipping right to the, I guess the legend, we'll call it for
Sure.
now. I'm sure you have a better name for it, and we'll definitely return to this. But I saw all these patterns, and as I flipped through the book, it was very clear immediately that it was different than pretty much anything that I had previously come across in the cocktail space. And so yeah, I immediately picked it up, and I am not a recipe guy. I don't like looking at cocktail recipes because I've read all those books, and yet this is still something I return to, especially when it comes to thinking about the way I present cocktails. So I'm hoping that we can just tell folks the story of the architecture of the cocktail, which is
Sure.
the title of your book. Talk about your collaboration with Amy. And then we can maybe get into this fascinating discussion of the similarities of cocktails and architecture.
They're very similar. And, the basic one, and I'll answer that question later, but they're both inspiring. And, an environment, you create a world, a small vignette, be it a little cocktail party or a little home bar or going to your favorite little corner pub for something, is to me is inspiring an experience. It's like you're transported. It's the same thing as looking at a beautiful building, a beautiful architecture, or interiors, or ornamentation, or details are as important to architecture as an embellishment is to a cocktail or the glass it's in. If the glass has some etching or has a vintage feel to it, I'm really visual. And so for me, the two are strongly inspiring cultural, iconic elements to our world.
Right. I have so many questions about that, but how did you end up getting paired up with Amy, and what was the process for putting this book together like?
It's fascinating. my freelance career, which is what I've done since I had the first child. I'm just a freelance illustrator. That's all I've said I am. I have learned about so many different creative industries because of the projects that have landed literally on my lap. So when Janine Dillon of HarperCollins UK sent me that message on LinkedIn about the book, I showed her the cocktail blueprint, and I'll send you the link because it's still out there. I have people finding me saying, do you have any? Can I buy them? And I do have some, and yes, they can buy them. They're great teacher gifts too. I'll just roll them up. Or now my kids are in their 20s, I just give them to their friends, and they're ecstatic. That blue line, there's something so artful about the simplicity of an architectural plan, or in this case, these are architectural sections. Janine loved the poster. I said, I really think it would make even a better book, because the poster, I don't know, I'm looking at one now in my kitchen. It's got about 18 cocktails. But this book, we put together 75. What fascinated me is I learned how books are made, how the publishing world works. And I've since done other books with the great team, in the UK and in the US. And this is how it goes. If it's an acquiring editor, Janine, she said, I want to do the book. Let me pass it by my team. I did a couple of proofs. Then they coordinated with one of their book designers who actually lives in Tokyo, but she's French. Never, it's this wonderful global thing. Thank you to my little cute computer and iPhone. So they make some spreads, what they're called, basically like a little brochure and a pitch letter. They take it to the London Book Fair or the Frankfurt Book Fair, where book buyers and sellers around the world gather, and everybody tries to hawk their wares. I mean, if you're a megastar, yes, they'll publish your book because they know they can sell it. In this case, they show it to the book buying world or major chains, Waterstones, Barnes and Noble, and all that stuff. And they came out of there saying, we can sell this book. So their next job was, and this fascinates me, was to find a writer. And in their world, they knew of Amy. She writes frequently for a lot of publications. I know she's doing a lot of work with Imbibe, and she just finished another book. I think it came out last year. So interestingly, I had not met Amy, and we were collaborating on this book together. The order of preference was have Amy write the recipes, send me the recipes, and I start to work. And there was a pretty short deadline, but if I push away all the noise and sit at my little drafting table and drink plenty of coffee and an occasional cocktail, once you get going, it's good. So I do that to pair with her recipes. And then it goes to Tokyo, to Sophie, who then does this beautiful layout. And then it goes to New York and London to the publishers and editors. And then boom, they're printing the book. And voila, there it is.
That makes what I'm sure is a very arduous process seem pretty simple. And that is Amy Zavato, correct?
Yes, Amy Zavato.
Cool. So
we did meet, though. We met the following summer. This book came out in October of 13. And I'm thrilled to see it keeps selling, because when Janine and I talked about it, we wanted it to be a classic, visually a classic. And Amy's writing is wonderful. She shares the history of them. But, as you say, what sets one drinks book apart from another? The stunning visual, which I sort of look at, I think, I can't believe I drew all that stuff, and I have the bad back to prove it. But it's so stark. And the beautiful patterns, it's almost lyrical the way this thing looks. So the editors had asked us to go to the Tales of the Cocktail the following summer to do some book signings with Octavia Books. And I thought, well, that is awesome. I'm going to make it a family vacation. Went down with my 3 kids, all of drinking age. Got a great place in the French Quarter. Everybody signed up for their seminars. And then Amy and I met at the table while we were, signing the books. I thought she was a kick. She was wonderful. We loved her husband. We hung out with them, had drinks, and I really just connected with her. So we've just stayed connected ever since. And we've been trying to think of, some other little collaborations we could do together.
Yeah, well, that's an excellent story, and Tales of the Cocktail is a great place to go as an enthusiast. And that Bitters and Bookstore run by Octavia Books, I've been in there with our bitters, but the book signings are also a really, really fun way to walk up to somebody like yourself or like David Wondrich, who's this huge star and in the cocktail world, and just get, have a real face-to-face conversation. It's a very rare opportunity.
Yeah, it was insane. And let me tell you, that one little thing elevated me in my children's eyes to an extreme high point. That was, Mom, you're cooler than we thought. Like, all right, that's really the only reason that I did it, guys, just for that.
All right. So now that we know the story of how the architecture of the cocktail came to be, I want to get weird and nerdy with it because I was also unemployable with my degree in poetry before I started this cocktail thing.
Poetry matters.
So I think we might have a pretty interesting conversation. And the big question I want to pose to you to kick off that conversation is, in what ways are cocktails and buildings similar and different, right? Like we've got scale is obviously a thing in there, but how do cocktails and buildings or architectural designs even enter into the same conversation?
Well, I look at everything. We don't need cocktails, but we kind of really do. We need architecture. We need shelter. Within shelter, we need an environment. We need culture. We need entertainment. We need something sophisticated, something that sets the mood and the tone when we're sharing our shelter with people. I think that they go hand in hand. And for me, an environment really tells a story. And I'm so visual that if I walk into something that's unattractive, it affects my mood. I can't go. Just like when you sip a cocktail that tastes nasty, I don't want it anymore. I want things that are lovely, that fit the frame of mind that I'm in, or the country I'm in, or with the complexities of the personalities of the people that I'm with at the time. One of the most obvious ones is they both are a structure. You make a cocktail in a specific glass for specific reasons. The amount of this that goes into that, the little teeny glass, the tall Tom Collins glass, the stemware, everything calls into consideration when you think about what you're going to be putting into it and what that cocktail, what those mixologists have put together to create that little experience with the fizz and the buzz, or the sparkle, or the color, or the clink of the ice, all of that. Architecture is the same way. You need a structure. You need the outside skin. But they're similar because they both need layers. There are the layers that go in that you build upon, and what you put down first matters. You don't start with drywall. You need to pour a foundation. So let's say a cocktail, the foundation is the glass. You know what it's going to look like, but then you have to layer. Then comes the concrete. Then, oh no, we've got rebar in the concrete. And then what do you do to support the walls? And then how do you hold it all up? And so as you're building this, the steps matter. You don't put the electricity in before you put the foundation on. And when you're making a cocktail, just like when you're making a wonderful soup or something incredible, baking is diabolical because you have to be precise, which is why I don't bake. But for the drinks, for the proportions of architecture, I feel like visually it's become as important visually to have a satisfying, beautiful, embellished cocktail as it is to have an attractive home. I mean, look at House, look at Instagram, look at how crazy everybody is with their HGTV, design your home and flip a home and tiny houses. And people are really spending a lot of time now talking about and becoming familiar with the vernacular of architecture and design and interiors. And when I grew up, no one said anything about it at all. I don't know. It just wasn't a part of lay people's interests. Cocktails, they used to drink a lot when I was young. I mean, the whole days of the train car and the boozers and the dads getting off with their fedoras, and they were bombed. And who knows what the housewives were doing all day, but I know my mom liked her martinis. It died down a little bit, but now there's a sophistication that's tied to both, and I feel a much stronger awareness just amongst us, the citizens of the land, who want and appreciate a really good cocktail and want and appreciate a really attractive, intentionally designed place to live. Even if it's a studio apartment, design matters, cocktails matter. So, I think that they're both, they're trendy for a reason, because they're sort of they're the indulgences in life. It's like they're the cherry on top.
Sure. I also don't bake.
It's scary.
Yeah, no way. It's too much like science.
Mm-hmm.
Not enough room for delightful errors. Usually they're just despicable errors.
Yeah.
When you were talking about, designing things with multiple layers in mind, with the people in the spaces taken into consideration, I was thinking of some very first principles things, like the fact that we live in a universe where there's two things. There's matter, and then there's energy, right? There's atoms and void, to put it in in a more atomic sense. And sure. I remember I took in, this is going to sound like a tangent, hopefully it won't be. I took in grad school, I had a class where we spent a lot of time focusing on a work called De Rerum Natura, which is it's a Roman translation of the first Epicurean theories, which actually ended up being one of the first written accounts of an atomic worldview, as opposed to, a different type of worldview. So like the concept that our world is made up of these little subvisual particles that create everything. And the way that Epicurus, through Lucretius, who is the writer of De Rerum Natura, described things, he described sound as the process of sound atoms moving through walls. And just the way that the dynamics of those things were described, it was just very beautiful and artistic. And the fact that it was described in poetic terms, it was excellent, but it called into question these big questions about spaces and about the bodies that move through those spaces. And I think that is precisely what architecture is, and especially when you were describing your background with literature and really getting into things like history through the characters and the fictional accounts that you read as a child and as a young adult. It just sounds like you have a really great background to come at this. And so I guess my next question about the designed cocktails in this book is, how did you decide on the patterns and the display elements that you use to take a cocktail and turn it into a blueprint?
It's a good thing that I went to school, because I know the term poché, which is French. Poché in architectural terminology. When you're drawing a plan or you're drawing a section, an elevation is when you just look at a blank wall. I'm going to draw the rectangle. I'm going to do the chair rail. I'm going to do the windows, doors. That's a flat thing. Renderings are when you do a whole 3D beautiful hand-drawn color rendering, so it looks sort of like a photograph, so you can conjure up what your design is actually going to look like. And I'm so old that I left architecture right when they brought in CAD. So now, primarily it's computer-aided design. I just take out my pencil, my pen, and my straight edge and triangle and do that. But learning about the elements of that part of architecture, the floor plan is what people would say a bird's eye view. It's what you see if you stare down at the space. And a section is when you slice through the stuff, so that you can, like if you slice through your, Monte Cristo sandwich and peel it open, you can see what's inside that sandwich and the layers. The cheese is not on the bottom. There's bread on the bottom. Or actually, there's probably a layer of butter with the bread and butter bread, so and so. So when in projects I've designed millwork, for instance, custom desks or conference tables or furniture walls, so that the contractor, the builder, knows how to build it according to your design, you slice through it in a drawing called a section. Then they need to build it according to your design. Structurally, engineers do it for major skyscrapers. I do it for little baby things and now for glassware. So the poché is the term connected to the pattern, which denotes the material. So the key, you had said before, the little pattern on the opening of the book, we label it specifications. In an architectural drawing, you could also say it's a key. it shows you every pattern is connected to a material. So if this was a house that we were up to, you would see the brick, you would see the gravel, concrete, rebar, plywood, 2x4 beams, the insulation, electrical. So every single thing has a pattern so that they could look at it and the guys or the gals know, oh, okay, that's plywood and that's 3/8 inch plywood. So we had to do the same thing with these drawings. So for me, I just started, and this is where it's kind of fun. I love doodling. I always doodled in the margins of my school notebooks when I would just tune out the very earnest professors doing their best to educate me. So in the idea of just making little patterns, I drew a bunch of rectangular boxes and I just started filling them in. Like, this is a pretty pattern. I'll do bubbles. I'll do grids. I'll do 90 degree. I'll do 45 degree. I'll do this, blah, 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 blah. I did run out. I did have a headache or two because it's hard to come up with new ones. I don't know. Do I have 200 all told? I have no idea how many I had, but I will say that as my kids would walk by me, I was doing this on the kitchen island over a summer, and their college friends would walk by, or high school friends. They did a lot of cheering me on, which I really appreciated. But they also were sort of amazed, and I'd say to them, give me a pattern. Show me the bottom of your shoe. Let me see what your sweater, what is your backpack? Because you run out of them. But I did enough to get this book done. You know, some of them they don't really have anything to do with in a perfect world, they would make sense based on what they are. I mean, the club soda has little bubble-like things. But after a while, I just wanted to do creative patterns that, to me, I wanted the filled cocktail graphically to be as pretty as a real cocktail. So when I put those ice cubes in there, I wanted them layered and, you know, sort of an asymmetrical. Sometimes I'd have the placements be very symmetrical, depending on what the cocktail was. If it was a 2-ingredient cocktail with no embellishment, then I would have wanted the design to be a little bit more kooky so that there was some interest when you'd look at the drink. Some of them are small scale, some were larger scale. Some I got to them and I thought, what the hell? Like, what was I thinking? This is a very impossible pattern to draw over and over again. But my biggest concern was I wanted the pretty shapes in each little drink to just make a pretty abstract design. And what is this? How do I even say that? Caparintha?
The caipirinha.
There you go. See, you know that more than I do. Okay, we're like-minded. I love the ice, the sugar, you know, everything layered, those circles, the lime, the direction on the above, the stir, everything about that to me is just a pretty little pattern. It would make a lovely little pillow if someone printed it in the right, you know, orange on top of maybe a teal background. So while I was coming up with patterns, I also would have to redo some patterns for a liquor or an ingredient if I didn't like the way it looked in the glass.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I like how you, with some of the ingredients, I'm just going to call out a few of them here, like the sugar cube. Yeah. Is one shape. It's a square with an S on it. And then you can tell that for your simple syrup pattern, it's a couple of those little cubes. So you see the tie-in with the sugar cube with the Peychaud's bitters. I see a bunch of little droplets there. Yep. And, you know, just like you dash little drops in there. Lemon and lime are both triangle patterns. They're kind of inverse triangle patterns.
Correct.
And the triangle has a lot of points to it. And there have been some psychological studies that indicate that you can, if you're asked to taste something that is acidic, for example, and you are given, say, 2 words to name it. This is actually applied to shapes, but the concept also applies to flavors. They drew a sharp shape with a lot of points and said, is this booba or kiki? And people called it kiki because it had those sharp. Yeah. Sharp. And so the acidity here, to me, this is kind of an extension of that. And just a lot of, you know, you can tell how much thought went into the design of some of these, especially the ones that are more common.
Well, no, I agree. I know that doing the embellishments was just super fun because, you know, how do I make sort of an abstract mint sprig? And I have sort of a a little bit of a Honolulu looking leaf, but I wanted something that I couldn't get too detailed because I knew these were going to be on a small scale in this book. So they had to be simplistic, but many of them, the embellishments especially look closer to a geometric version of the real thing, while still really tying into the poche and the patterns that were being used in the layered elements and the ingredients of the cocktail.
Right. And so with these cross sections that you produced, one of the things that really strikes me as interesting is that it it 100% necessarily needs to be displayed in a sedimentary way where you're layering these measurements on top of one another.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's, say, 2 ounces of something, that's going to be a fairly large or thick layer compared to maybe the half-ounce layer that sits on top of it of a different ingredient. And so you can almost see through these layers, if you're looking at it in a sedimentary way, like the layers of different geological deposits in a canyon, you can almost see which ingredient, the process of adding these ingredients to the glass. And so even though it doesn't have like a video or an action component to it, you can see the process already there in the glass. It's like deconstructing something that's been constructed.
It's true. You can also understand the proportions.
Exactly.
Right? As I would warn kids going off to college, make your own drinks, number one. Don't let somebody else make your drink. But then also just be aware of what tastes good to you, too. If you're just starting with a simple gin and tonic or something, there's a ratio. And it's important to understand the ratio so that you get the flavor that you like, or the flavor that the drink is supposed to have. And seeing it as you've described it, as I'm looking through these again, it really is, it's such an artful way, thank you, architecture, to show how much of what needs to go into something that, in its completion is one thing. But
Yep.
but you can understand all of these layers and how important it is and how much work went into the creation of all of these through time tested and, different situations and cultures and climates and histories, what went into every single one of these things as beautiful little recipes.
Sure. And there is kind of a bit of an alchemy element to it, right? You're taking these things that are separate, and then when you enjoy them, when you take that sip, it's almost like you took all of these separate things and made some gold out of it. But, that was the challenge to the alchemist, was finding those ratios.
You're right. That's well said. Your poetic side is showing.
Well, I spend a lot of time thinking about it, for better or for worse.
I think it's fine. It's working out okay for you.
I did want to ask about the measurements, and this is something that you have a little bit of experience traveling and writing about things in the UK and in Paris, and so obviously in the rest of the world, people measure things on a base 10 system, which is really logical. But here in America, where the cocktail was invented, at least in its current form, we measure things in standard. So I noticed that in the book you list metric and standard measurements for the cocktail recipes, and I'm just wondering if that ever presents a translation issue between the U.S. and the rest of the world. At least if you've ever had conversations with someone and found that translation issue to be a problem.
Well, the reason that the book shows both is because it was published for both the US and the UK target audience. HarperCollins UK is based in London, and they go through England, Ireland, Scotland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. So their measurements correspond with their culture. But for this, it really was the reason was because the audience, the people that were going to be buying this, would want to adhere to one or the other. It just sort of made it more flexible to different cultures, and those measurements corresponding with, as you say, we Americans versus the rest of the world.
Yeah. One last question I had about, I guess, design and color before we jump into some lightning round questions here is the blue on white. And this is a very dark, I'd say it's maybe just shy of a navy blue. And it's a very white, if that makes sense. It's not an off-white. And so when you're paging through the book and looking at it, it's just unless you're sifting through blueprints all day, I have to imagine it's a very, very kind of stark experience compared to what you're usually looking at. So is there any reason why these colors are used in the book or in blueprints in general?
History. History, my friend, will give you the answer to anything. Early on, when blueprints and reproducing large architectural drawings was something that they could do, there was a machine that could do it. I don't have the answers. I can't tell you the chemicals involved, but the only way to reproduce these black line drawings, because you draw them in pencil lead, Frank Lloyd Wright's drawings, Louis Sullivan's drawings, the initial method to reproduce a blueprint, they were called blueprints, blue line drawings. The ink and the reverse, it was blue. It wasn't a black ink that was used. They didn't turn black. They turned blue. So if you unearthed some early architectural drawings from some early 20th or 19th century building, they're going to be blue. And it wasn't till later on that they started doing them with a white background and just a black line. So this really has to do with it's more of like a industrial technological reason. So again, back to when we first did the cocktail print, the inspiration was there was sort of like an engineering thing in some old bar in Wisconsin that was there was no copyright to it. My art rep friend and her husband saw it and thought, let's see if Crate and Barrel wants to do this. And Crate and Barrel said, we want to do that. So then they called me and said, do that. I already knew from my architectural training the history of the blue line drawings. And so for me, one of the things that I was pickiest about with HarperCollins was it needed to be the correct blue, because it's not robin's egg blue, it's not sky blue, it's not purple blue, it's the blue that the blue line prints could only come in one color. And so that's the reason for the color of the background. I've done another book, it's Architecture of the Shot, and we did a bright red, and we're in talks, fingers crossed, to do the architecture of coffee with some libation coffee drinks, and that is sort of being pitched around right now. I've done some spreads for that, which would be super cool because I got a lot of coffee bean patterns in my noggin that I've been working on. So that's the reason for the blue.
Very cool. Well, that's a cool little piece of history for folks.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have time to do a few lightning round questions?
I have all the time in the world. Beautiful.
Starting off here, what is your favorite cocktail? And if you can't name a favorite of all time, what's something that you've recently fallen in love with?
I am going to give you one of the most bland answers. It is a Bloody Mary. I just love Bloody Marys. I love V8. I'd go out and I would just not get schnockered because I'd fill up on the V8 juice. I like a little kick to it. I love olives in it. I always would just love that with gin, not even with vodka. The different phases of my life, I've loved a gin and tonic because it's sort of seasonally. In the spring, I want a margarita. I love pisco sours. Bubbly, a Kir Royale, Prosecco. The last drink I had was a lovely glass of Prosecco. So it really just kind of like the music. If you ask me what music I like, I will list you 100 genre of music. The situation, wintertime, this or that, a glass of port. But I also love the old-fashioned one, sidecar. I love vintage Hollywood movies. So when they're sidling up to the bar and they want to have a beer and a bump, I had to explain to my daughter what a bump was. And then she was somewhere recently and she heard a man say a bump. And she said, I know what he meant. It was, shot of rye. So I really go into the mood of the moment when I'm going to have a cocktail. And now with my little super cool kids, they'll throw one my way. And when we'll get together for a holiday or dinner out, they're introducing me to something that they've just fallen in love with at, some of the places that they've been to in the city. So we sort of always sample new things.
I love diversity.
Yeah, I do too.
If you were a cocktail tool or ingredient, what would you be and why?
Okay, this is the easiest of all. I would be a swizzle stick because I love mixing things and environments and people and stories all together into one wonderful experience.
Beautiful. Very cool answer. If you could have a cocktail with anybody in the world, past or present, who would that be? Where would you go? What beverage would you drink? Just kind of paint a picture for us.
All right. I have two answers if that's okay.
That's perfect.
I just finished reading Z by Anne Therese Fowler, and it was her depiction of what Zelda Fitzgerald's version of her life was, and it was a mess. All along, I'd always read that she was the naughty, crazy one, and F. Scott kept it together. That is not the truth. I believe this is the solid truth, though I have to do further research. And I've tweeted with the author, and she's encouraging me to continue looking into more answers. I would have a gin Ricky with Zelda Fitzgerald in the Riviera, and I would want to know her side of things, because I think her alcoholic husband was gaslighting her. I think she was an independent woman who wanted her own writing career, and he sabotaged it based on the demons of his own weirdo makeup and brain. So that's the first one.
Quick question before we move on to the next. Have you seen I believe it's an Amazon series with Christina Ricci as Zelda Fitzgerald?
Love it. Love it. Love it. She played it to a T. I mean, sort of the exuberance, the manic, the needy, it was perfect. The embodiment of the whole thing. And Zelda has always been described as in and out of mental institutions. That doesn't mean anything. There's a great Netflix piece, I can't remember what it's called, maybe I'll send you an email, about this wonderful independent artist who may or may not have been a lesbian, but who talked about those things, who inherited her parents' money, and she would go to Provincetown and paint. Eventually, her lawyer got a hold of the money after her parents died. He had her committed, and he just lived off the money, and he gave her little parcels of cash. She was totally fine, but after 40 years locked away, yes, she had, some mental issues. Yeah. So I'm really rooting for Zelda here. Yeah. I'll get back to you when I find out more.
Cool. And what's this part B of this answer?
Okay, Queen Elizabeth.
The current or the past?
The current. The first one probably drank mead and she was dressed in gold, armor. The current one, because she has witnessed such a vast, talk about archaeological digs. What that woman has had her face and her foot and her head and her hands involved in, my lifetime plus another one, I think is really fascinating. And so where we would go, because I think she's really funny. I think she's cheeky and has a little funny sense of humor, not to mention her sense of duty and service and loyalty and morality, which is kind of in short display right now. I'd have a gin and tonic with her because she likes a G&T every day. And we would be on the turret of St. George's Chapel in Windsor overlooking Harry and Meghan's upcoming wedding.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I recently came across something on the internet, and I don't know if I can find it again, but it was the displayed signatures of every English monarch going back to some very, very long ago time. And it was all just kind of on one page, and they all fit on there. So it's just kind of cool. I think as somebody who's interested in design and lines, it's cool to go back and look at that. So definitely see if you can find that.
I'm going to Google it. I'm writing it down right now.
So we got the kind of speculative questions. Now we're going to move on to some advice. Are there any books about cocktails that have been particularly influential or enjoyable for you?
Early on, not early on, a couple of years ago, I grabbed the Savoy just because I seriously, I don't know why I don't live in London. I'm a big Sick fan, and that's all there is to it. So I loved it because of its history, but right now, my favorite is my buddy Jim Meehan's Bartender Manual, because of the rich depth of information that he shares. He's quite something. I mean, he's a little bit of the guru right now that I really admire. Plus, he's a sweet guy. He's super talented. He's very grounded, and the cover is so simple. I love the green. I love it's almost like an blind embossed. That little bird creature. I don't know what kind of a bird it is, but I could Google him. I'll just ask him. But I really admired how he put it together, what he chose to add, the histories that were included, the insight, the gear, the tools, the how-to, the recipes. It's very thoughtful, and I think it's really thorough.
Great. So we'll link to both the Savoy cocktail book and Jim Meehan's The Bartender's Guide.
Yeah, Bartender's Manual.
Sorry.
Yeah, he's mixography on Instagram.
Cool. We'll link to that as well.
great.
If you could give any piece of advice to someone who's just starting to learn about or experiment with cocktails, what advice would you give?
Okay, my first advice is get cool barware. And I don't mean expensive. I mean, go to a garage sale, find a vintage cocktail shaker. Some even have the proportions and recipes on the side. So the graphics are kind of cool, 40s or 50s or 60s, sort of set the mood. Have a small collection of glassware. Maybe get 4, shop in 4s. Get 4 highballs, get 4. I prefer a coupe glass as opposed to a tall champagne glass because you can make so many things. And that's so Grace Kelly. And that's the kind of glass that I really like. So I think and you can get these at antique stores, flea markets, Goodwill shops, garage sales, go to towns where people drink nice cocktails and just go to grandma's garage and you can grab them. So I think that having beautiful glassware adds to the experience. One thing that all of my friends and then other people that would be my friends if I knew them, but people that have commented about my book, who've written to me or sent me emails, they have Friday night cocktail parties, and every Friday they'll pick a different drink from the book and buy the ingredients and then make the cocktail and plan an evening around it. So that way it's sort of not overwhelming. And what I liked about it, especially with, like my kids, nieces and nephews, or my kids' friends in their 20s, they're not breaking the bank. They're not running out and, robbing a liquor store. They might be doing the gins first, or they might go in categories so that they can just slowly build, the key repertoire of things to have on hand. And then a few little extras, add to those. You need a bottle of bitters. You need this, you need that. You need some vermouth and stuff. But for me, it's all about appearance. Enhances, if you're going to take all this time, and these things are not free, and you have to pay for everything that you're going to be drinking. And you also want to educate yourself about the history. You want to do it right, or just go and glug some beer at the local corner tap if you're not going to pay attention to it. I love my cocktail shakers. I love antique swizzle sticks. I've got some glasses that have dominoes stacked around the side. I just go to eBay and I'll see beautiful vintage cocktail ware and I'll just click buy a set for nothing. Just a little cute detail on the glasses they're less expensive than buying them new from the store. And they have a history. So they make it kind of a cool little pretty kitschy party. So to me, getting the right looking vintage supplies kind of adds to the experience.
For sure. And estate sales are great for those, as well as you mentioned, flea markets, yard sales. And if you happen to be in a place with a good antique kind of representation, you'd be surprised by how inexpensive it can be. It's not always inexpensive at an antique store, but I think I spent this time last year, I went and I hit maybe 3 or 4 stores in South Jersey because I just happened to be in the area, and I think for $50 I came out with like 10 glasses and a couple of other random pieces.
I think you could do that in a minute. And when you're doing your bar, ladies and gents, if you come across at a garage sale a little tiered, what do they call it? Like a tiered dessert tray or a little tiered tea tray. Those are darling for your little relishes, for a little cheese, for a little snacks that you serve with your little cocktail party, because you have to have a couple of little nibbles. And just set the mood, pick your decade and create a little tableau so that your friends, it should be a special event. It should be a celebration. There should be not necessarily going out of your way and having a theme, but you could do a theme. You could tie it into a book club and make something from the year of the novel that you're reading. And then we're going to have a cocktail party to do the whole thing. If you do the Zelda F. Scott, give me the information about Zelda's real life story, because I'm really interested to learn that. So I like setting stages, even if they're little, inexpensive, but vintage garage sale, those are treasures that really make our experiences better.
Yeah, and we do have a glassware episode, so if anyone is interested, getting your curiosity piqued, please do go back into the Modern Bar Cart archives. It's in the first 10 episodes. We spoke with Andy Whitehead of Literary, and we talk about all these things, kind of like the anatomy of the glass with, just different terms that you'll find, how to identify if something's vintage. So check that out, folks, if you're interested in picking up some vintage glassware. And in terms of setting the mood, we've got a playlist for everything these days, so it shouldn't be that hard.
I'm a fan.
All right. So before we jump off here, how can people best digitally connect with you, or how and where can they find this book and perhaps some of your other prints?
Well, they can learn about me by going to my website, which is mwoodpen.com. So it's my name and a pen, mwoodpen.com. I've got sort of a hodgepodge of portfolio, cool projects, press about it, all of the books that I've illustrated, a list of VIP clients, some anecdotes about different commissioned work that I've done, and a bunch of junk. So you can see my world there. I think there's a link on there that you could buy one of my cocktail prints. I know there is. I say I think it is. I edit it all the time, but I'm pretty sure I kept it on there. Hard to say. I am approaching 60. And then my books, they're sold all over the world, which I really think is cool. I'd be here outside of Chicago working and drawing and thinking, poor me, I don't go anywhere. And then I'd Google my book and I'd say, oh my God, we're in Korea, we're in Indonesia, we're at the Tate, we're at the National, we're at the this, we're at the this. And I see on Twitter when someone's, got a book at a cool bookstore far away, they are thrilled. And to me, that's thrilling. So when we were in Paris, we went to Shakespeare and Company and, visited my books and thought, well, that's cute. We didn't buy them because we can get them for less here. And you can just Google the books. I know I push independent bookstores as much as possible. So that would be my first guess. They can order it even if they don't have it in stock. So that would be my first vote. We all know there are other places to get it, but I say let's help the little guy. So Architecture of the Cocktail, Architecture of the Shot, and I've got some city sketches, City Sketch London, City Sketch Paris, City Sketch New York. Yeah, and knock on wood, I'll have Architecture of the Coffee before too long.
Beautiful. Well, we will put some links to your personal stuff on the show notes page, and I'm not going to put the Amazon link for your book because we're going to
help the little guy.
Yeah, that's what we're going to do. So, folks, you know what your local bookstore is, and if you don't, shame on you.
Yeah. Oh, Instagram, because that is I love Instagram. It's like I'm going to say it's a slideshow. Instagram, my handle for anything social is at mwoodpen.
Great. Melissa, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
You're welcome. Now go get yourself a nice little cocktail.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's two big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning, so remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and production assistance by Samantha Reed, cocktail and architecture insights by Melissa Wood, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2018.